dodging like strays. Climbing out the gutter, I am real like the fray. Wrapped in shadow, but they shine like noon. For hearts beating, sink, break the.
Welcome back, the King's Effect podcast. We're at season 1, episode 20. I am so thankful for all of my loyal subscribers and followers that have been following us, that have been liking us, been talking about liking the journeys that we've been doing. We're going to keep this going. We have so many new ideas and so many new guests that's going to come on next season as well, too. But without further ado, let me welcome Dr. Jamel. He's not a doctor, by the way. That's just the title. So he's going to introduce himself, where he's from and what he does. And then we're going to get into the conversation. It's going to rub some people the wrong way, but we're going to still have this conversation. So how you doing, brother?
I'm doing all right, Brother Daron. And I'm not a medical doctor. The doctor is the title. You reach a certain level of expertise in a profession. But glad to be here. And good. I am so I guess just a little introduction about myself. I'm an educator. I am a professor of education leadership coach, and I'm a former school principal. And so I hang out in the realm of leadership in schools and leadership in general.
So talk a little bit more about that. How did you get into that profession?
So I started out as a teacher. Actually, I started out as a teaching aide. If we go way back, my grandmother, I said when I was 7 years old, I want to be a teacher and help Black people. And so I became a teaching aide coming out of college and being active in the Black Student Union and working with young kids in the neighborhood in New York City, in Queens, and wanting them to have an experience on the college campus that I attended. And that turned into tutoring and after school programming, and then I went into teaching. And then from there, went into school leadership. And so, the journey, I would say, was informed in a broader sense by my upbringing. Came out of the Nation of Islam. And there was a commitment to service kind of in the community, expectations for young people. I come out of a tradition, African-American communities, where it was expected that one would use their gifts for service. And so that kind of how I got active in college and how ultimately I became an educator. So, And so I was a principal. I was a special educator, taught in New York City, in East New York, Brooklyn for 12 years. And then I was a principal of schools in Massachusetts, charter school, elementary charter school. I was a founding principal. And then I led a middle school, alternative high school, and elementary school. Now I teach leadership at the university level and coach school principals. So I'm still trying to stay connected in schools today.
Yeah, and that's commendable. We need more Black, educators, coaches like that to be around the young people. That's going to help mold them and shape them into a better future. Mm-hmm. What I want to ask you now was what was your upbringing like? Take us to that before we get into the real conversation. What was like?
So, I grew up in the Nation of Islam. And so that both provides a structure and a kind of a mission. And as a kid, you don't really know what that means, but you're immersed in this space, people who have access of you, hold high to you. And there's a sense that, which is bigger than just you or your immediate family. So that kind of informs how I'm growing up. And at the same time, I'm also growing up at a time of a lot of social upheaval, late 60s, early 70s. I'm a child, just not even in school yet. But it is also a time where all these things are playing out in people's families and in people's homes, right? What's happening in the civil rights era. And so those things are impacting my family. My member of the Nation of Islam, he and mother were very young when they had me. They weren't for some of the challenges of society or with small, and so all of that comes together to create some difficult circumstances in the midst of this other structure of support, right? So you've got both. So I grew up in this kind of both things that were very certain and stable, and things that were very uncertain and unstable. And then that took its toll on the family in terms of housing insecure. As I said, I grew up poor. I lived in Harlem for a little while, then Queens. So I have these mixed memories of both real promise. I was really good in school, real high, right? But also struggle, poverty, family challenges, things that kind of shape those always operating in my mind, right? Even and so that even as it leads me into my field, I'm wanting to be around communities that kind of had us, are experiencing, but also have promise, also have hope, or space where hope can be cultivated, right? So to that, you know, those are things that kind of inform become. Also, just to add a piece, my mother and father relationship dissolves when I'm middle school, right? So I spend after age 12, I spend those early teenage years seeing my mother struggle as a single mom with 5 kids. So that also informs how I'm feeling and managing and ultimately the things I'm committing to, So because as you become wiser, you start to see how the things that happened in your life as a youngster give you for how you approach the world as an adult, you know. So educator, as a teacher, and then as a principal, I'm single black mothers come in struggling under the weight of just life, I'm saying, having to manage the relationships, the kids, school, it's this is also related to the broader conversation about relationships. So it's as I'm describing how I'm coming up, I'm seeing that kind of informs why I feel this way, or why I am this way, or why I have my relationships in these ways. Yeah. I may have gone off on some tangents there.
It's okay. We let our guests do what they go do, right? There's nothing wrong about that as long as we, talking about mental health. That's the important about relationships, how we grew up, all of that impacts or plays a role in mental health. But my next question that I had for you is, when you talked about a lot of your upbringing and you were maybe financially, living home, mom provide as much as she wanted to, but she could she did her best. Do you think that typically impacts how men, see life? Like when they up and they start to date, do you think they feel like they have to go after the struggling women to feel like they have control? Let's speak onto that conversation. Or do you think it's just like, what do you think? What's your thoughts on that?
That's interesting. I can speak for my own, so I wouldn't want to make any generalizations. But I think that there is something to how black men who grow up with single mothers, or if the mother's not single, grow up with mothers who have struggled. It does impact the way you enter relationships, but I think it can go a lot of different ways. Some guys that I can tell, from guys I grew up with, become the archetype of the thing that harmed their mother. They become the again, it's not to cast aspersions on that male or that man and whatever were the challenges he faced, right? But as the child, this is what you see, right? You see mom got to hold it down and dad is wherever. You know what I'm saying? And so, and now that my dad was wherever, because he had to get his life together. He was not going to be any good for us in the space that he was in at that particular time. It was actually, he saved his life by leaving. But as an 11, 12-year-old, that don't make sense to you. You know what I'm saying? So I get that. So I want to be clear that I'm not knocking, because that's real and that's part of what we're talking about. But to your larger question, but it does inform. So some of us become that. And, I, as a younger man, when I'm going through my little player stage, there was an element of that. You know what I'm saying? I'm just being honest. There's an element of that. Brothers from the older generation used to talk about having the gift of gab, right? You had a game. Yeah, I had a period when I was like, I'm gonna say like 20 to, that was, and reflect on it. It was, brother, I guess I felt like I was a decent looking young man. I was in school, so I was doing some things, what I'm saying? I don't think I presented as a slouch, but I also knew that there was a certain amount of manipulation that was happening, right? That I was engaging in, and as well, right? So I'm not trying to say like, oh, I was playing with women. Women were playing us too, but I was taking on that role, is what I'm saying. You know what I'm saying? I could have decided to take on some other role as a young man, but that was the role I had taken on. And I think part of that was because there were certain experiences that women were having that would make them vulnerable to particular ways. And so a younger man, I took a that, right? But as an older man, I started to think, when I get serious, I started thinking about, well, what does that really mean? You know what I'm saying? Like, you spin on it, but I know I was part of, I don't think I was ever really like awful to a young woman when I was a young man, but I certainly know that there were a few whose self-esteem I didn't help out. You know what I'm saying? If I'm being honest. And so you start to think about that. You start to think about how how each other, because there were some people who were working through their trauma when they were dealing with me too. You know what I'm saying? So I think you start to think about what are we really doing when we're engaging in these relationships and they kind of end on notes, like really doing to and for each other. And you start not wanting to be complicit in self-harm and harming others in your community. When I says, yeah, it's time for me to get serious, that's what we're saying. It's time to stop bullshitting around because ultimately going to do me any good, and that's not going to do any young woman or partner ultimately is, but we're talking about male-female relationships. That's not going to do them any good down the line, because I think about Black men who have come to distrust Black women and Black women who have come to say, ain't no good Black men, right? And I think it's a collection of these kinds of negative experiences that have led people to form those conclusions, right? So I start to think about, I don't want to be part of that no more. You know what I'm saying? And also, I think that there are, and everybody at the same time, so be that old dude in the club still chasing women.
Yeah, and I want to add to that. Thank you for being so vulnerable.
Sure.
There isn't a lot of good men in the world, per se. That's everybody has player days, and they go through different relationships trying to see how many women they can get, who can sleep with the most, but they don't realize the detriment that they're hurting the Black community, specifically Black women. There's a lot of baby mamas, baby fathers. You're creating broken homes. You hate children and you don't want to take care of them. That's, I would takes two to tango, because we don't know what the woman does
to
prevent the guy from taking care of his children. She could be actually saying, don't come back here, don't do this, don't do that. So we don't know the inners and outers of everybody's relationships. But I think for the majority of the, statistically think majority of it, men are leaving because they just don't want to accept accountability on their end to take care of all those children, or they just don't want to accept to even, maybe that's not even what they asked for, so they walk away. Just once you get pregnant, that's it. That's a wrap.
Yeah.
There's nothing you do about that. You're either going to abort the baby or you're going to man up and take care of it. But on the woman's end, she has to want to accept the man to be there to support her. You can't just say, come when you want to, and then throw it back in his face when he's not hardly taking care of the child. Which one is it? You're confusing. So I feel like there has to be a level of reciprocancy on both parties. That's communication lacks, because you're not talking. You're doing all this bickering, arguing, but you're not getting to what needs to be said. Speak on that.
Well, I think there are times where men and women are in relationships are seeking different objectives. I think that people might have their own expectations for what they want out of a relationship. And then when you're trying to like calibrate that, I want a career, or I want you to be friends, or we should travel, or whatever it is. Or I want a kid, or I want a lot. But I think, or I don't want it. So I think that people have to do some kind of calibrating about what they want and what they need. And then they don't always do that. Like, sometimes, it was about a lust thing, and then it became something more serious. And so you haven't even sorted out whether this is the right, like you're real. It's like, yo, she's hot, he's hot. We comfortable. We'd fun together, right? And so that might change. And so that does that serious before you two have figured out, are you friends? Are you two, do you two see a common future together? Right. And so they weren't calibrated. And so people have different, and then over time that wears, like this is the heart flutter that dies after a while. And then it's like, so what's the real substance? So that the things. I think, with unresolved trauma, I think there are men who enter relationships wanting to hold a more traditional role, like I'm the head of household, I'm this, I'm in charge, partly because that's what we've been socialized into, and partly because society has confined when Black men can be that the outsized almost. And again, this is just my riffs based on my life and experience, right? So people can take it with what, but there becomes this outsized need to assert domination because you can't anywhere else in society, because the Black man has to be held in check by a hierarchical white supremacist society, right? And don't want to ignore patriarchy, right? It is a real thing. And then I think on the other hand, there are oftentimes women are not resolving their trauma that they've had with their relationship with their father, right? And or the men who've hurt them before you, right? And so everybody's coming in a little incomplete, you know what I'm saying? And so, yeah, we haven't calibrated. If we haven't even talked about any of this stuff, you find out through the relationship that, oh, this is going to be a problem. Or if children get involved, this when you find out, oh, here's it replicating itself in another generation, maybe amongst each other, but now, ways we want to train our son or daughter based on what we're bringing to it. Again, because we haven't calibrated, what we stand for. And so around maybe, in some of our homes, there are conflicts around the male children and whether or not what is the appropriate amount of quote unquote masculinity that is healthy for a young male. That can be tension in the home. A mother might feel like, I want him to be a little more empathetic, and dad might be like, oh, that's soft, I don't want him to be that way. You know what I'm saying? And then that becomes that image gonna raise a child. Because it's not. Sometimes you will watch some memes on, and sometimes we hypersexualize we will hyper masculine, make the male almost like some hood rat on the corner, and that's pretty cool. He's 5 years old and he talking crazy and got pants hanging down, and he a woman. I mean, you see it on social media, and this is our people posting this stuff, right? So we're now passing that malehood down to our son, or some hypersexualized female image to our daughter, and then just reproducing. And if we haven't even visited that ourselves, and we haven't calibrated this is what it becomes. It becomes a reproduction of our social and our trauma. Yeah. So it's a lot.
Yeah. You said a lot that I want to dissect.
Okay.
First of all, I'm going to talk about it from the female's perspective. I think they have a level of intuition or idea of how they want the relationship to work. And the male has a whole nother completely idea of how they want the relationship to work. So while what the female didn't grow up with her father, she might feel the need to be more masculine in the relationship and controlling. That dynamic can be unhealthy for the man because he wants to lead and she wants to lead. Can't be two people. That's where the clash goes. Can't be two people that leading. One can lead. And I say that to say because there's a lot of masculine women I notice, just how they carry themselves. And I think that can be a detriment to the relationship when the man wants to lead and the woman wants to lead too. So then they're clashing. It's always arguments. I said, do this. You said, do that. And it's always this arguing and bickering, and that no one is really getting anywhere to the root of, well, you never communicated to me that you wanted to lead the relationship, or she never communicated. And so that's where the foundation is not set up right. And if the foundation is not set up right, then it's just going to all fall down in the end. It's going
Yeah,
to all fall
I'm
down.
gonna I'm gonna disagree with you on that a bit, brother. I think that both can lead. I'm a bit on this notion that one has to lead. I think that there can be co-leadership, and there actually should be. I feel like even this can create of the challenge that we're describing, because we're insisting that it has to be one or the other, which means to a certain degree we haven't opened our mind up to a possibility of something different, right? We're like, what has always been must be what always is, and
Yeah.
so pick one. You know what I'm saying? So I want to challenge us to be like, maybe not, maybe not. I'm past. None of us were there, so we don't really know. But people articulate a past in African societies where it was quite common, and we anthropologically, it was quite common for women to be queens, pharaohs, empresses, all of that, right? Warrior queens, right? And co-ed men, which is exclusively the history of Africa. You don't really see that on any other continent's history. And I just because we're the first and everything comes from us. So any possibility of human arrangement we must have had, right? So we can imagine a time where patriarchy was not so overwhelming and obvious. So I want to leave open the possibility that, yeah, women leadership can be normative, co-leadership can be normative. And I think it will help us in this conversation if we allow for that. You see what I'm saying? So I'm gonna disagree with you a bit on that, brother. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's more about it from the male's perspective. And, we lead and take
Yeah,
charge and stuff like
but
that.
do always. And are we really always? I know this because the other thing we know, you know, from life experience, and we know this from like theory and that I study as a person, but there's formal leadership, and then there's unofficial leadership that still is, right? So civil rights movement is the perfect example. There is the formal leadership that was very publicly male dominated. And then there was the background leadership that we know none of that would have been possible without, right? Black women who held it down, ran the organizations, gave out the flyers, made the phone calls, connected the people, checked people egos. That's leadership, right? Without that, there is no civil rights movement. But we know the public facing male piece of it, which is also leadership. It's not to take away from it, right? But it's another example of what I'm talking about, right? It's not an either or. It's really both and. We've just decided to focus on one. You know what I'm saying? So I have an evolving, I view, an evolving relationship with these questions because, like I said, at the beginning, I have had to experience the family history of grappling with what does it mean to be in charge, to run stuff, right? So yeah, I about that. And again, it kind of like I was you at the beginning. What you come out of informs the lens that you bring. So someone else could be like, "Nah, I don't see it that way, bro." You know what I'm saying? And that's legit. Do think it's important to pose questions when we get to these binary conversations, right? I think that we position binaries as if they're top bottom, top down. They could just as easily be left right. You see what I'm saying? Yeah.
Yeah. And trauma, I think, so Black women that's not healed too,
Mhm.
um, on the man to, you know, have to be healed. But there's some trauma that women bring to the relationship and make them not heal as well too. So then it becomes the toxic traits that you see. She might be controlling, she physically abusive. All the things that the media doesn't really talk about it unless it's a man doing
Mhm.
those
Mhm.
things.
Mhm. Mhm.
So the
Right.
trauma is there.
Mhm.
It's just she wants to throw it back up in the man's face when things like that happen to her. But it takes two to tango. So if you're gonna put your hands on him, be ready to be ready for him to put his hands back on you.
Well, I mean, I think has caused enough harm in our
Hmm.
communities. So
Yeah.
yeah, having witnessed domestic violence,
Hmm. And
it's
I'm not condoning it, but I
yeah,
just
yeah,
see
yeah,
friends would tell me what they go through with some of the females that they date,
yeah,
and me too.
yeah. I think
A lot of stuff that the men have to carry, that the
yeah,
women take accountability for their parts as well as too.
yeah. I think of gender, people who are emotionally and physically abusive, um, they support and help to kind of heal layers of what them that way. So I mean, I like men can be abusive physically, emotionally, psychologically. So can women. Anyone can be. Children can be. If they aren't guided and if they are themselves experiencing trauma, and they take it, bullies, example of this, right? Who may be young. So yeah, so I don't know. I'm not really comfortable with the focus, like, because first of all, ain't no sisters here with us, right? So I feel like I feel like it's important. Like, on the hand, we need a space where it could just be brothers talking about what brothers talk about. But I'm hesitant to form conclusions about women that weren't my experience, and there's no woman to kind of say, wait a minute now, have you considered this or that? Hesitant. I can only speak about what I've seen and experienced about the harm of any kind of violence, and who were victims of physical and emotional violence as well. So anybody who's a victim of violence, is painful to and have to try to navigate that. And people turn to some terrible coping mechanisms if they get the help and support they need. They to someone else. They engage in self-destructive behaviors. Substance. I no. And part of the physical. And I think I could just look at our community in general. Black America, I think, with the exception of Native Americans, have experienced so much historical trauma and violence in the society for so long that it is, the DNA. That's what epigenetics is all about, right? Is literally in our codes now, our trauma responses, and the dispositions to be certain ways, and then the chemical reactions that impact our bodies and our health outcomes, right? All that's the historical violence, not against Black Americans or just African peoples in general, right? But we talking about here, but against our people here and indigenous people, it helps explain the cycles of violence that we have in our communities, because the same things that you were talking about right now, this is also endemic in Native American communities, right? Violence against women, male-female relationship disintegration, right? And I argue which two communities experience the most direct and violence by not only a society, but of its population, right? It wasn't just the government; it was also white citizens who enacted this violence and were by state and federal governments and militaries. So our history here is so fraught with violence that it is no wonder that it is still seeping out of us even as we try to heal, right? And we're meeting it on each other. So I look at it that way, and not so much which gender is doing it in which way. We're
Yeah.
all experiencing the trauma of the socialization here.
Yeah, and even in times like,
Absolutely.
came from that, and still we're people have that old mentality
Yeah.
that, I'm in white people or I'm enslaved to my jobs and stuff like
hmm
that.
hmm
And that's all. And then sometimes people, they be addicted to working, that they don't even realize that they have something mentally going on with them because they're so addicted. They're so focused on the grind that they don't even understand that, why is I'm working so hard? What's really going on here?
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
really going on here?
Yeah.
Because your brain has to rest, your body has to rest at some point. You can't
hmm
always be on and on working 7 days a week.
Right. Yeah.
What's
Well,
really on there, brother?
right.
You
Well,
know?
we are. I mean, that's a deep question, because society was created like I need to recognize the United States started out as a corporation, right? It was a colony, and a colony is just a little Southern corporation from Europe, right? It was designed to make money, right? And the whole point of this exercise was we're gonna set up these little spaces and we're gonna make money, and we're gonna do it through forced labor, right? So the worth humans here was determined by your value as a unit of labor. Even the whole quote unquote Protestant work ethic is about you are as close to God as your earthly value in terms of what you produce. And so we live in a society that has trained all of us to equate our value with work and how much we work. And grind culture is part of that. And we're, and like be bragging about working 40 years and never taking a day off and thinking that that's virtuous, right? Think about that. That means how many times did you ignore a family need? How many times did you ignore your own personal health? You know what I'm saying? How many times did you miss something, some kind of or experienced because you were never taking a day off because master got you so trained? You know what I'm saying? So we are trained to be units of labor, and that means, and just like the slave, you work to death, and it don't matter. Nobody cares about that enslaved person's emotional well-being, whether their family can see them, whether they take frustration and anger on the animals and this is a continuation of that. Just, it's not enslavement. You get, the grind is the same. People's just nonstop struggle. And I work 3 jobs just to put food on the table. Right. And so similarly, because in this society, if you ain't working, you're considered worthless. And even within that, certain jobs, you're still considered worthless, or people don't have to regard you. So we're still trapped in that. And so the trauma associated with that and the that it breeds is still happening, because that set up, right? The ethic of this is a corporation, you are a unit of labor, everything you do, all your value is that. And then the minute you're done, you're cast aside. That's our whole, right? So of course that's going to play out in our relationships.
Yeah, and I'll get to one other thing before we get ready to part here. Sometimes, more that they don't value their partner. And what I mean by that, like, they see them, they're not really spending time with them. They're not really treating them like their queen or partner.
Right.
And so the woman becomes agitated with that. And she's like, well, never have to me. What am I doing in this relationship? And stuff like that. And I think that it's so disheartening. They have to work so hard just to survive. But as Black men, we've worked all of our lives, ancestors and stuff like that. So we have no choice but to sometimes. But then I also need to buy it. Is it worth the relationship?
Yeah,
is it worth me working so hard that I don't have even time to spend money?
Right. Yeah. I principle, this was very much an issue. My wife put her career on hold, or at least kind of slowed it though, because my taking off as a principal. So that means we relocated. We have small children, and I was principal of a school. So my days were long, brother. Like we talking like hours was. My days were 12 hours minimum, and it was her and the small kids for several. And yes, there were I took the night shift. The kids were young, actually went to my school. So there was, that, avoid on the weekend. But even in the best of circumstances, I recognized that I wasn't able to give the balance of time, like you're saying, and like be available for her in the relationship, because I'm grinding, because that's what a man is supposed to do, right? Quote unquote. And we're here trying to make this work. And so I do this part, and she, she's well, so she started part-time and then went back in full-time as the kids got older, in elementary. So first 5-6 years, I'm just on the run, not running on the in a school or doing something, and it takes its toll. That was one of the moments in our relationship when it was like, but I know you're doing this for us, but you're not physically here. You know what I'm saying? And so in your mind, you're like, but I'm doing this for us, right? And her mind is like, but I need you here. We both got a legit beef, right? or I should say, not a beef. We both got a legit claim. And this is one of those things that we're seeking differing objectives in that moment. This is that calibration that I was talking about, because her claim is my claim is legit. But if we just stay there, we pass right by each other. You know what I'm saying? At some point, we got to kind of calibrate the two planes to try and find that balance for each other. And that's hard to do. You know, it's easy hindsight to be talking about it in this way. But when I was living it, it was hard to see it in this way.
Okay, so my final kind of wrap it up.
Right.
How can Black love still be relevant and survive with accountability on gender?
Right.
How can we survive the Black love?
I think it survived. I first, as challenging as I just want to say, as challenging as things are in the Black world, because I these things from a U.S. perspective, things are challenging in the Black world, and that's because I believe anti-Blackness is a global phenomenon, and so for whatever reason, right, the world has decided that Black people are the doormat, whether it's Africa, America, the Caribbean. We are perceived by the world as the doormat, to be taken advantage of, to be taken from, and to be treated as, oh, y'all are, you know, whatever. And recognize that first of all, this is a global system. So it's not so much just what's happening in America. But I also know that it can be easy for us to just focus on the pain and what's things like that, and forget about ailment and pain is also part of the human experience. Right? All humans. And there's a whole lot of love still, right? Despite all of this, like all the stuff I'm telling you, part of the reason it even happened was because of a certain level of commitment and love, right? Like we had these because we decided we were going to commit to each other. We just needed to work through some bumps and stuff like that. Or even this conversation about Black love, even like what you're doing, is a commitment to Black love. You know what I'm saying? So that right? The questions raising, the responses, the guests, right? Each one of them little bits is a commitment to Black love, right? And so I feel like we gotta also see that part of it. We haven't given on each other we you know what I'm saying? And some of us are becoming those. I think a platform like this, brother, is part of that intervention. Those of us brave enough, and you're starting to see more public figures who are Black speak with vulnerability about relationships. You know, some of it formative, but I want to believe some of it's not. Speak about relationships. And these are people who are in these positions where they don't have to really care, you know, but recognize trauma in the village, and that at the end of the day, what has held Black people together historically has been Black people. So I feel like, you know, like Kendrick's gonna be all right, but that doesn't mean we aren't in pain and we aren't feeling broken sometimes. But this is a beautiful thing you're doing, brother. And I think that is a testament to the answer to your question.
Yeah, and I have a little bit of a different perspective.
Fair, that's fair.
It's good. I think it's a combination of a lot of things that needs to be happen between the man and the Black woman. He needs to come healed.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
You need to be working on a plan to get therapy.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yep.
Go to see a lot of different therapists for a lot of things.
Right.
If you're struggling with sex, there's a sex therapist. If you're struggling with trauma, there's a trauma therapist. If you're struggling with communicating, there's a marriage therapist. There's a lot of things that can make the relationship work in your favor, or it can all come crashing down. But it takes two to tango.
Yeah.
You have to accept your flaws, and he has to accept his flaws.
Right.
And you blaming one another.
Absolutely.
Because it's always somebody did something, but you were part of the problem too.
Right. We're fallible human beings, so it's always going to be, what's your role?
Blame game.
What's your part in this? Yeah.
Who did what? I think if you go through whatever counseling that you need to go through, I think that's going to help solidify and help carry the relationship. But you got to want it get better. In both of you guys.
Right.
It can't be just he did that, she did together, and fix it. If you really care about each other, fix it. That's all I'm going to say about that. I do thank you for challenging me, my thoughts and my beliefs and stuff like that. That's good dialogue. It's good to have it's good to have different opinions in life,
Yeah.
because one viewer might agree with you,
Mhm.
one viewer might be me. There might be a viewer that can combine both of our thoughts and
Right,
those two.
right, right.
So that's why it's important to have different beliefs.
Yeah.
But other
I
than
think
that,
I have experiences in our community is what will make solutions more apparent, right? Like when we put all of us, right? So we have to get the full variety. And I think it's from that that we start to move forward. But I thank you so much for this.
I will post all my links and description and the video description and all of that to your LinkedIn. I'll send it to you. But please
Okay.
subscribe to the channel.
All right.
If you want to share any businesses or things that you got going on, please send them
Okay.
my way too, and we can get this rolling.
Sounds good.
No
Sounds
stranger though.
all right. Sounds good. Daron.
Have a good one.
You too, brother. Thank you.
White dodging like strays, climbing out the gutter, I am real like the fray. Wrapped in shadow, but they shine like noon. For hearts beating, sink, break the